Yes, hello. Hey, it's Jason. So I'm going to jump in and start answering some of the questions that were asked in the first Q&A session on Friday. A lot of great questions, a lot of really impressive questions. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then go back. There is the unit at the very end of the first week of the course. I did an open call for questions related to the course material discussed in the first week, just in case there were any clarifications. So I decided I'm going to do this kind of like a podcast mode or just audio so that you can listen to it on your headphones while you're doing dishes or driving or other stuff you got to do. I figure that'll be a much more convenient way for you to take in some of this information. We got lots of video coming. Don't worry, there's a big video unit ahead for the next week for the Muladhara chakra, or several video units. This is just kind of to help you take it easy and integrate the course more into your day-to-day. So, by the way, this is listening to the answers to these questions is certainly not mandatory. It is additional, it's bonus to the course. But that said, there's probably a lot of stuff in here that you might be wondering about. It's always the case that if somebody in the class is asking a question, it's very likely that lots of other people have the same question. So I'm just going to start off and jump in. There were a lot of questions, so I will answer as many as I can, time permitting. But I'm going to start off with the ones that are specifically about this course, which is what I was requesting. It's not an open office hours. So, and of course, we do have open office hours for magick.me subscribers where you can ask any question. This one is specifically about this course so that we can keep it focused for everyone who is focusing on this material, which is you. So, there are some questions which are a little bit tangential. I'll see what I can get to, but let's start off with the ones that are directly related. So, okay, Christy M asks, "Hi, loving the course so far. Thank you very much." She says, "Thank you for the work and care you put into it." You're welcome. "I have an existing Vedic meditation or TM, transcendental meditation style practice using a mantra that is in my mind as opposed to spoken aloud. That should also be moving me into my parasympathetic nervous system. Should I continue with that practice throughout this course or pause on it? So far, I've been continuing with it. I'll start with my current meditation practice and then do Vipassana or the guided meditation afterwards. They seem very complementary, and my current practice puts me in a good state for the body awareness or guided meditation. The only downside for me is it takes more time. But with the current state of things, all I have is time. Definitely curious what you think. Thank you." Okay, great question. And I'm guessing it probably pertains to a lot of people in the class, since a lot of you are not new to the subject. Some of you may be already doing other spiritual practices or even practices that I've recommended in other courses like Adept Initiative or Chaos Magick or any of the other ones. So this is a question that comes up a lot with any spiritual practice, because if you've been around the spiritual world for more than 6 minutes, you've probably been exposed to lots of different practices. And this becomes, at first, when someone's first getting interested, their first question is often, what is the correct one? What's the one that I should be doing? And people can spend a lot of time trying to learn everything, trying out lots of different things, hopping around from practice to practice. And some people kind of put that down, but honestly, I don't, because how else are you supposed to learn? I mean, how else are you supposed to get a sense of what's out there, right? Other than trying everything. So I like that approach. I like the smorgasbord approach. But eventually you kind of got to get focused, right? Now, even for more advanced practitioners, it's very likely that you end up with a nice kind of grab bag, a basket of different practices. And this is actually one of the most common conundrums. Which one do I really stick with? And often it's a choice between the more Vedic style meditation. So for instance, TM is mantra yoga, counts as that type, but there's lots of others. Hatha yoga, Kriya yoga, pranayama, that's part of classic Raja yoga, all these different practices. And then Buddhism, and often people kind of they get confused which of equally valid or similarly valid practices they should pursue. And this is really the sticky one, because it's easy if you end up with practices that suck, right? Like if you get something out of an Anton LaVey book or some like, cheesy dime store, airbrushed new age book, chances are that's not a particularly useful spiritual practice. Although, hey, if it works for you, all power to you. But when it comes to equally valid practices from real traditions, it can be tricky. And this is it's not a totally new problem, but it is definitely symptomatic of the world we live in now, where we have more access to information than human beings have had in a long, long time, right? So this is kind of a challenge created by the internet. It's like when you have access to all the information, sometimes you can get into a bit of analysis paralysis because you don't know which one to go with. Okay, so with that said, in general, what I want to say is this. If you end up stacking lots of different practices, I have nothing against it. I've done that a lot, but you won't really get a clear sense of what they do, right? And it's like you're trying to play multiple instruments at the same time, and the sound waves are canceling each other out, and you can't get a real sense of what each one is doing. So for instance, in this case, let's just talk about TM, right? So transcendental meditation is essentially a mantra yoga practice. It's when you meditate with just a simple mantra. In the case of TM, a single syllable word. Now, the issue though is if you try to do it and Vipassana at the same time, they're going to be competing in a sense where you're not really going to be sure which one is having which effects. So my recommendation is that at least for the duration of this course, that you stick with the Vipassana meditation as given and don't alter it. Another one that people often like to do is they want to say things like, hey, if they're more from the Hermetic tradition, they want to say like, hey, can I nest it in between pentagram rituals? Like, can I start off with an LBRP and then do Vipassana? And the answer is yes, just like combining it with TM. Sure, you can, but if you start off like that, you'll have no baseline or understanding of what the meditation actually does because you're just combining all these different things. And then you're creating your own practice. You're creating something out of thin air, and more power to you for experimenting. But like I said, if you don't have a baseline for what the meditation actually does on its own, you don't really know. You don't really know what you're doing. You need to get a baseline sample. So my recommendation is just do the body meditation as given for this course. Now, at least give it a couple weeks, right? And if at that point you want to add in other meditations, go right ahead. This is not, I will say this also, this is not a Vipassana course, right? To truly learn the Vipassana technique, you need to take a Vipassana course. In this course, I'm using a basic Vipassana technique as the core axle of the course, but it is not to be considered like a definitive course on Vipassana. Again, for that, you need to go to a Vipassana retreat or a workshop. I recommend the Goenka branch, just from personal experience. That's not an endorsement of the organization because I have no idea, but I had a good time with their retreats. Not for beginners, though. So, what can I say about that? I think that, I think that my general recommendation is just stick to the meditation as given. And then later on, once you get a sense of it, you can add stuff. But there's going to be a lot of material to cover in this course, so that should keep you busy. Okay, great question, though. Let's see. Okay, another great question from Spencer S. Hello. Recognizing lots of long-term students and names here, which is great. So hello, Spencer. Okay, so Spencer asks, hi, Jason. Thanks for your hard work and teaching. As always, you're welcome. I'm very wont to react to the sympathetic as a sort of knee-jerk and then feel forcibly on different levels to keep repeating that motion physically. I'm often pretty quick to see myself acting in habitual ways I know aren't healthy or catch it soon after. but I'll just keep doing it regardless of my awareness about it at the time. This relates to bodily and verbal reactions to self-induced behavior or arguments with loved ones. I'm wondering what sort of physical acts might be good to try to do just as the inner tension is rising to move or speak, like trying to take a deep breath before diving into the water. I never tried Crowley's razor or rubber band technique. Maybe that's a good one. Thanks for all your time and efforts. It's been great to take a lot of courses with you this year. Thank you, Spencer. Okay, another excellent question. So the answer is, of course, more Vipassana, more awareness. And so in the moment, I mean, Spencer's kind of asking, like, when I get caught up in the moment and I'm in the reactive mode and I can see that I'm going to take an action or reaction that is probably not the wisest, but I kind of like, jump into it anyways, and just go for it. I know all about that. Then what do I do to kind of short circuit that? So the answer is, and this is really core. I mean, these are great questions. This is something that people across spiritual techniques are very interested in. I've seen even Orthodox Christians talking about this, and so it's a really core question. So, obviously, the more self-awareness, the better. Part of we're really talking about building up the executive function of the brain, which is in the prefrontal cortex, and it needs to be built up by practice, by action, by self-restraint. One thing that I've pointed out a few times is that, in many senses, one's ability to prosper in the world is related to your executive function, the brain, right? Which is the executive function of the brain, which is the inhibitory function of the brain, right? So, of course, if you just act on every impulse, then, that you're not going to get very far. But if you're able to inhibit actions that are antisocial, but not just that, but inhibit yourself from doing anything which brings you further away from your goals in life. And ultimately, at the magical level, inhibit yourself from doing anything which does not fulfill your true will as you understand it. That's when the proverbial pedal really hits the metal and you start to make really great progress in life. So, profound progress that most people are not capable of ever reaching within their lifetime. So we're kind of talking about two things: more self-awareness and the ability to short circuit or exercise inhibitory function over actions. So in response to your question, yes, Crowley's rubber band technique, this Liber 3 Vel Jagorum is the technical name for that book, is actually excellent in this regard, but I'm not necessarily going to assign it to the class for obvious reasons, not least of which is the liability aspect, but also the fact that it's just actually not related to what we're doing at the moment. That said, I will say that deeper and deeper meditation and more self-awareness will simply allow you to essentially slow down time so that you can see the gap in between the thought and the action, right? Which is what it's all about, right? You can slow down enough so that in between the action, in between thinking about taking the action, the impulse, the electrical impulse almost, and the action itself, you see the gap. And the better you are at meditating, and by the way, meditating itself builds up the inhibitory function of the brain. No matter what type of meditation, Raja Yoga, as long as it's not just free-floating, loop-de-loo, anything like any real technique of meditation, Raja Yoga, Vipassana, anything like this, all of it builds up the inhibitory executive function of the brain. So meditation itself, you don't need to go so far as to get into tortuosities like Liber 3 Vel Jagorum, although, hey, it worked for me. You don't need to go that far, though. It's the discipline of meditation itself not only allows you to slow down to see the gap between thought and action, but also to exercise the inhibitory function, the executive function, to either change course or stop the action altogether, right? And if you think about it, just the process of meditation of bringing your mind back from stray thoughts or turning off thought altogether, which is a higher level, which is possible, absolutely possible. This is how you build up that executive function. So the answer is meditate harder. Okay, here we go. We have another excellent question from Jess, who says, in relation to the challenges we are facing in our primary relationship, Anahata Chakra, how do we know if it is best to step back and let our partner's words and actions affect us without taking action, or go into fight or flight, react, and take action? I'm currently in this situation. My partner has told me he doesn't think he loves me or see a future with me, which has hurt me tremendously. Do I accept this as a rejection and react, or do I allow him to be uncertain within our relationship and continue to be with him? Well, that's a tough one. So let me speak generally first. So generally speaking, you don't ever want to be fight or flight in a relationship. You want to be a little bit and take a step back, right? Now, and non-reactive. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in the Anahata Chakra section. We have a lot to cover in that. Now, that said, if somebody sends you a pretty clear message that they don't want to be with you, it's kind of hard to, they've simply told you where they're at. And sometimes we have to accept what they're saying, I mean, it's like, that doesn't sound like a state of uncertainty on this person's part, unfortunately. Now, that said, I don't want to say too much about this because I don't know you. I don't know the person. I don't know the situation. I don't know how the situation changes from day to day or month to month. I literally don't know anything except 3 sentences I'm reading off a comment. So I don't know your situation. That said, I think that in this case, it is often best to be clear for ourselves what we need and what our bottom line is, right? Like what are, like so you need to kind of ask yourself, what are my emotional needs? What are my needs in a relationship? Because those matter, those matter, a relationship is just that. It's 2 people, both people matter, in that relationship. Otherwise, and if it's not equal, it's kind of like, well, it's a lopsided relationship. And if it's really unequal, then it's not really a relationship, or certainly not a healthy one. So I think that in this situation, possibly the best thing to do is to be as clear as possible about what your needs are and be clear about that for yourself. These are not demands of the other person. It's more like checking in and saying like, valuing myself, what do I need? What are my real true needs in a relationship? What do I need to be fulfilled? And that's not like, my partner must bring me cheesecake 3 times a day. No, it's more like I need to be valued and seen as a person. I have these goals in my life. I need a relationship that's supportive of me, that's mutually supportive. And if those are, and so if you then come from that and then express those needs constructively, not as demands, not as blame, not as you're not doing this for me, but if you just simply say like, hey, this is what I need in a relationship. This is what I need for myself, as a human being at a soul level. If your partner's not willing to meet those and says as much, at that point, then you probably need to look for somebody who does. Right? Because if you're in a situation where you're not receiving respect, your needs are not being met, then it's unhealthy, unfortunately. But I do want to point out that that's very different from reacting. Reacting is different from being proactive. What I just described is being proactive, saying, here's who I am, here's where I'm at, here's what I need, this is what is right and true for me. Reactive is, you're doing this, you're not doing this, how dare you, giving ultimatums, saying, and so on and so forth, or just doing it in roundabout ways, which we often see in relationships where it's kind of like, it becomes passive aggressive, it becomes poisonous, it becomes people throwing barbs and hooks at each other. It can get gross. So that would be my general thinking on that. And we'll talk a lot more about that in the Anahata section. So again, I don't know you, I don't know your situation, I don't know all the factors at play, but those are my general thoughts on meeting relationship needs. And good luck on sorting that out. I hope it works out really well for you. Okay, another question from Bailey. Jason, I've read some firsthand accounts of people with COVID having to deal with the panic response as part of the struggle with breathing. Any thoughts on breath holds as a controlled way to gently observe the panic response and attempt to become more objective when facing it? Yes. Okay. So first, obviously, just to repeat, I am not a doctor. I am not a psychologist. I am not a psychiatrist. I am not trained in any of this stuff. So seek proper medical advice. That said, don't hold your breath. I kind of see where you're coming from. I don't think that, just holding your breath is, I can see there's an attempt to create a kind of interrupt. My general advice would just be to gently steer back to actually what is recommended in this course, which is just simply the awareness of the sensations naturally, instead of trying to force override the body's response. Right. And so I would recommend the body awareness, the vipassana of coming up and coming down gently and being aware of the sensations, understanding that they are changing. Okay. Those are my thoughts on it. Okay. So that's what I'm going to cover for now. I don't want to, I want to keep this fairly short. So I know I wasn't able to get to all the questions, for which I apologize. But I want to definitely keep this fairly focused, and we will continue to do Q&A sessions. There will be live Q&A sessions. As promised, there will be live office hours further down the road. I'm not doing that quite yet because we haven't covered enough territory to really get into that. And I want to make sure you guys are practicing the exercises rather than kind of intellectually engaging with it in a sense, or second guessing it. So lots of good questions. Let's get back into practice, and we will do more Q&A sessions very shortly. So thank you very, very much for the great questions. A lot were very illuminating. And the ones that I wasn't able to get to, they were all good. Sorry I couldn't get to everything right now, but hang in there with the course, and lots more will be coming. There's also the office hours in magick.me subscription section for ones that are not directly related to this course. Okay, hang in there and keep practicing. We will be back up with the Muladhara chakra units very shortly. All right, see you soon.